Okay, and I think Daniel, for our final question, I think so. Let's say there's a FGT kind of settled in the U.S. So in this scenario, let's say the beneficiaries of the trust, some are U.S. persons and some are non-U.S. persons, and then kind of for the duration of the trust, it's kind of taxed to the grantor until the grantor deceases. After that, though, do you see kind of this phenomenon of trying to cut up trust, some part of the trust left for U.S. beneficiaries, kind of that would be a U.S. trust, and then the other half would be maybe like some part of the trust assets would go to the non-U.S. beneficiaries, and then that would be split into a separate trust, and then maybe both of those trusts would still be domiciled in the States, but one would have U.S. tax consequences while the other one wouldn't if they hold kind of foreign assets. So I guess, do you see that scenario frequently, and how does your firm typically approach that type of client?
Yes, we see that scenario a lot, where you've got a mixed beneficial class, just as you described. You've got some U.S. beneficiaries and you've got some non-U.S. beneficiaries. And so, depending on the assets that the trust holds, and depending on where those non-U.S. beneficiaries are located, it may make sense, to split the trust into multiple trusts, so that you can decide, which of the trusts are going to be U.S. trusts for income tax purposes, which are going to be foreign trusts for income tax purposes. Perhaps for the trusts that are created and held for non-U.S. individuals, they want to put in a non-U.S. person to control a substantial decision relating to the trust and cause it to be a foreign trust. And depending on the assets that are held by the trust, that might be tax advantageous for the non-U.S. beneficiaries to not have a U.S. trust for income tax purposes. So what we try to do with our foreign grantor trusts is we often do allow for some kind of automatic division that takes place after the grantor's death. So that, and the most typical scenario is you've got multiple children of the grantor, but it doesn't have to be children. It could be other family members as well. And you create separate trusts for each of the children, each of the beneficiaries. And that way, for each trust, you can decide who's going to be the trustee of that trust, who's going to be the investment advisor, who's going to be the distribution advisor. And we try to build in flexibility in the provisions so that, for the trusts that are intended to stay U.S. trusts for income tax purposes, we build in these provisions stating that that's really the intent. And unless the interested parties get together and make a decision for some reason that the trust for the U.S. beneficiary is going to become a foreign trust for income tax purposes, the provisions we build in say that by default, these trusts for U.S. beneficiaries will remain U.S. trusts for income tax purposes. And then we'll include language that states that makes it easier for trusts for non-U.S. beneficiaries to not necessarily have to go through that strict process or have default provisions that revert the trust to being a U.S. trust for income tax purposes. So, again, the name of the game is flexibility. We try to build in enough flexibility and enough provisions so that each trust, the interested parties can then decide, does it make sense for the trust to remain a U.S. trust for income tax purposes? Or do we want to, at this point, make it a foreign trust, in particular for non-U.S. beneficiaries? So we see that all the time when it comes to foreign grantor trusts where they have a mixed beneficial class.
所以刚才在讨论的就是说，设立人在设立信托的时候，可能会有美籍跟非美籍的受益人。 那在这样子的情况下，Daniel 的讨论就是说，就是这些信托他们设计会有相当大的弹性，就是说，在美国设立的信托其实是可以有就是有一个弹性，是说你设立下去了以后，假设这个设立人也真的过世了，然后呢这些资产留在信托里面是给一些美国人，一些非美国人。那当然，美国人跟非美国人在美国的税率就会有不同，所以他可以去把信托里面的资产切分开来，一部分给非美国人，一部分给美国人。那美国人的部分当然就是在美国缴税这样子。那如果是非美国人的话，其实他如果是持有的资产是在美国境外，产生的收入也是在美国境外的话，其实很大一部分是不需要在美国课税的，就是因为他的受益人是非美国人这样子。那当然细节这是要 case by case 的讨论，但是它主要重点就是说，他们在设计这些信托文件的时候，都会去把这些弹性考虑进去，尤其是有家族以后有可能是美国的受益人，或是有家族现在已经在申请绿卡的过程中啊，或是在移民的过程中，他这些都会特别做考量，或是甚至有家族就是有3、4个小孩子，或者2、3个小孩子，他的国籍是不同的，那这样子的话，这些考量都可以在美国信托的文件里面呈现，然后也是可以降低相关的税负这样子。OK， 好。Thank you, Daniel, so much. I just translated that last part, and we really appreciated having you on here again. And it's really a pleasure to discuss with you all of these content every time.
Okay, Daniel, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good to see everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.